Hi, this is John Hood from the band Sid Rumpo and the Elks. You're listening to Retrospectives with John Broughton on KC Radio 97.7 FM.
How and where did you discover the blues as a young lad?
Well, in the 60s, when I was in high school, I heard the Rolling Stones, and especially their early records, I really enjoyed. With Brian Jones on guitar and harmonica, I thought he was just awesome. But I did like the rhythm and blues they were playing. And I went back to their roots. I investigated the roots of the Rolling Stones, Jimmy Reed, Howling Wolf, Muddy Waters. They're probably the main ones from the Stones that I got into. But then I got into other chess artists, Little Walter, Sonny Boy Williamson, so a lot of harp players. So that's how I got into the blues, was via the Rolling Stones.
Do you remember your first guitar at all?
Yeah, it was a piece of crap that my mum bought when I was about 15, and I couldn't play it. It took me 3 years to learn to play guitar at all. I had a guitar for 2 years and couldn't play it. In 1967, I went to university for my first year, and in that year, I learnt to play guitar well enough to play rhythm guitar in a band and blues harmonica pretty well for Perth. I mean, I was probably one of the best blues harmonica players in Perth. Not that I was very good, because it was very early days, but I was playing in the style from the US rather than the Stone style, which is the English style, say the Yardbirds, the Stones. Their harmonica playing, while it sounds good, it's not particularly strong technically. I mean, the best players are from the US, Little Walter, etc. So I really learned guitar in my third year of trying in 1967 at university, along with the harmonica.
So in those early days in Perth, what sort of music scene would we have found? Was it a lively scene at all?
Yeah, but we call it fruit music. It was all pop bands playing Beatles and Stones and all the Mersey sound. And there was quite a scene. There were a lot of venues in Perth before rock music came along. And I think rock music hit about 1967, 1968. When I say rock music, not the Hollies or the Dave Clark Five or the Beatles, but rock music like, say, Jeff Beck, Led Zeppelin, that kind of thing. When that came, a lot of rock bands started to form up. But they were too young to play the big gigs, because the drinking age at that time was only 21. So it was hard to get gigs, and there was a very big agency scene which had the pubs all locked up, so it was very difficult to get work. I started in my first blues band about halfway through 1968, and it was very difficult to get work. We started getting work in 1969, but it wasn't really until about 71 when the drinking age had changed to 18, and the rock scene really kicked in and overtook what I call the pop or fruit scene. We used to call them fruits because they wore suits, and playing, terribly dated and boring music, for what I was into. I was a real sort of blues aficionado, if you like. Really loved the blues at that age in my life. So there was a healthy scene in Perth from about sort of 1971 on.
So just give us a brief rundown on some of the bands you were involved with prior to Sid Rumpo.
Well, when I started midway through 1968, there was a band in Perth called My Grandfather's Blues, and a friend of mine introduced me to their singer, Steve Tallis, who you may have heard of. And he invited me to play a jam on harmonica, and I played at a club. I just got up and played about 4 songs, and at the end of the gig they said, would you like to join the band, just as a harmonica player, because they already had a rhythm guitarist. So I said, yeah, sure. So I used to get on and off the stage as songs were requiring the harmonica or not. That was about mid-68. By about 3/4 of the way through 1968, the rhythm guitarist got called up, and it all happened very quickly for him. So I took over rhythm guitar duties. I couldn't play lead then. And I took over rhythm guitar duties from sort of September 1968 till the end of the band, which was now called the Jelly Roll Bakers. We changed the name from My Grandfather's Blues because that was a pretty sad name. And we did quite well. And we also had Peter Walker in the band, who went on to play with Bakery, and Owen Hughes, who went on to play with Sid Rumpo, and Steve Tallis, who went on to have a pretty prominent solo career. So we got a regular weekly gig, and was the first rock band or first rock blues band to get that. We used to play 6 hours one night a week at a club, and it was just great. We weren't very good at blues because it takes a while to learn to play it really well, but we were trying. I can hardly listen to the recordings we made then, but you've got to start somewhere and you've got to build up experience, and we didn't have anyone to listen to. All we had were the records. So we had this weekly gig which used to go off incredibly well, but we decided to split up because Peter Walker was playing guitar not so much in a blues style anymore. He was a bit too loud and rocky, so we decided to fold the band. So for about 3 months I didn't do anything, and then Steve and I were walking along the main street of Perth one day, and we heard a blues band rehearsing, and it was upstairs in a building, and we went upstairs, because in those days you could do things like that, and it was actually Dave Hole. Have you heard of him?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, he had a three-piece, and we said, could we join? So I played rhythm guitar and Steve sang, but Dave's the kind of guitarist that doesn't really leave any space. He's pretty intense, especially now. He's really full on, so there was really no space in the band, which is something that I really enjoy, is space in music, but there wasn't any space really to play harmonica that much. It was too overwhelming, so that was just a rehearsal band that didn't last. So we left that. In early 1970, it would have been early 1970, I formed another band with Steve and his brother. It was called Duke. And that was the first band that I think the music was really, it had the feeling. We were playing arrangements of blues songs, a bit like Canned Heat.
Yep.
And there was a lot of improvisation. But of course, playing that kind of music, it wasn't very popular, so it didn't get a lot of gigs. And there was a band around the time called the King Biscuit Company, featuring two brothers, twin brothers actually, Reg and Ivan Czar, who went on to play in the Elks. They had a band called the King Biscuit Company, and in a few months, that band, three of Duke, joined Reg and Ivan to play in the King Biscuit Company. So that went into about September 1970, and I'd been called up myself, but I decided to do a runner, and I went to Victoria for 3 months, and I worked in Descurio with Peter Mann, and that was a really great experience. I met people like Brod Smith, Rob McKenzie, David Pepperell, the singer from Captain Matchbox, whose name escapes me.
Mick Conway, yeah.
Yeah, I sold him his first jug band record.
Oh, wow.
And if I ever run into him, I'm going to remind him. Because I was pretty knowledgeable by that time about blues, and Peter Mann understood that, so he had me control the blues section. It got pretty powerful. We had some really good blues albums in that shop. But eventually the strain wore on me, and I went to see a solicitor, and he said, you've got to fight this, but you better go back to Perth. So I went as a conscientious objector, and my lawyer was Peter Dowding, who later became the Premier of Western Australia.
Wow.
And during that time, some friends of mine and I opened a record shop called 78 Records, mainly for the purpose of being in a record shop where we could import records that we liked. And that went on to be incredibly successful. It's still going. It started in 1971. It's still going now in 2013. So it's had a really good run. None of the original partners are still there, but it's still going well. So when I had my conscientious objection case, the story was that you either got let off, or if you didn't, you had to go to jail for 2 years or go into the army, and I was never going into the army. So 3 days after opening the shop, I turned up in the court and had the case, and I got off. So then I went back into the shop and worked through 1971. And all through 1971, I'd been talking to Bob Searles, who was a guitar player going to university. It was his last year, and a pianist named Ken Wallace, who was also doing his last year of university. And we decided to form a band, but we had to wait till the end of the year to get it together. So by about November 1971, and Owen Hughes was there as well from the General Bakers. So there were four of us, and we needed a drummer. And we tried a few drummers from Perth, and they didn't work out for what we were doing. But we put an ad in the Sunday Times, which was the big paper over there. And one day a guy called Noel Herridge turned up, and he was a Victorian driving around Australia, and he played with the Adley Smith Blues Band in the 1960s. He played with Broderick. So he really fitted in well, and he played the length of Sid Rumpo. So that's a history of the bands up to Sid Rumpo, if you like.
Fantastic. And with Sid Rumpo, when you decided to move the band to the eastern states, was Melbourne the obvious choice?
Actually, I don't remember. It probably was. I mean, Noel came from Melbourne, and he knew the scene, and I think in the end it was the best place. I think to go to New South Wales would have been a bit dead. I think Victoria had a healthier rock scene. In fact, not as healthy as Perth, where bands were working every night of the week, but it still had a reasonably healthy rock scene. And we tied into Michael Gadinsky's agency, because when he heard us, he signed us up to Mushroom pretty much instantly. So in that year, 72, we worked in Perth from about February to October, and we won the Battle of the Sounds by the Hoadley's Battle of the Sounds. And then about a month later, we're in Victoria. And we had to struggle a little bit at first, but people soon caught on to us, and we're soon working a lot. The agency really liked us. I think we started playing about the end of October. In 1973, on the Australia Day weekend, we played at Sunbury, and we're on the record. And by that time, we'd been signed to Mushroom. So that's the story of the early Sid Rumpo. We kept going till about August, when I left for various reasons, which I won't go into, but I've got a book out I might talk about later, which sort of explains that. Then I went back to Perth, and they got Mick Elliott to play in my place. They recorded a record called First Offence, that's spelt with an S, and it's just recently been reissued, actually, in about the last 2 weeks. And it's the complete album reissued with the B-side of a single, but plus 2 tracks that were recorded live that I'm on. One I play harmonica, and one I play guitar. So that's relevant information for anybody who was around that time. That's just been re-released. First Offence.
Yeah. In hindsight, is it a bit of a regret of yours that you didn't stick around long enough to play on that album?
Well, that was one of the reasons I left, was that it was taking too long to get to record the album. Now, I left in August 1973. They actually didn't record the album till the August of next year.
Wow.
I wanted to get the... I mean, when we first signed with Gadinsky, he said, we'll get a record out for you, but it just wasn't coming out. And I had other personal issues, like I had a shop. Like, we weren't really... It started out well, but then the work dropped off. And I've got a condition known as bipolar disorder, which I wasn't aware of at the time, but I don't know whether you know about it, but you get depressed or high. And I was probably getting pretty depressed about just sort of hanging around all day, not doing much, and not playing lots of gigs. So I decided to leave in August and come back and work in the shop, which was really going well. We'd really kicked on, and we were building it up. It became Perth's biggest record store by a mile, and yet it wasn't selling middle-of-the-road music. It was just basically started out selling blues and rock and jazz. But they eventually came around and sold a bit more. But it became a huge organisation. It was a very big record shop. When people would come in, international artists, they were just incredibly surprised. When Canned Heat came in, they couldn't believe the blues records. They bought a whole lot of blues records. It was such a good shop. It's smaller now because the industry's diminished. in terms of record sales, as you would understand through, there's iTunes, and there's a lot more now besides the music. When we were young, music was the big thing in your life, music and sport, if you like. Nowadays, there's dance music. There are really not any gigs for bands in Perth anymore. You might play once a month, and you'd play on a billing with 4 other bands, so you just get a half-hour set.
Yeah.
But in those days, music was huge, and we did very, very well out of it. And I played in a few small bands when I came back in 73, but the next big band I played in was in 1976, again with Reg and Ivan Czar. We formed the Elks, which was quite a big blues band that toured Victoria a couple of times as well. And we're getting so much work that I left the shop so we could tour. And that was a very good rhythm and blues band. I think it was Australia's best authentic rhythm and blues band because we got the original feels of the records down, but we improvised the guitar and harp solos. And that music played well is a very good dance music, so the band was incredibly popular. It even did well in Victoria. We got quite a bit of work on the tours and got really well received. Joe Zepp and the Falcons heard us and really liked us. And when we recorded an album, we got Wilbur Wilde came over for a day and laid down sax lines. And one of the sax solos on the record, we flew the tapes to the eastern states, to Victoria, and Joe put down a solo on a song that I'd written, a sort of a soul ballad that's really beautiful, you know, it's just really great. So the Elks were the next biggest band that I was in, and they've got a record out called Refer to Draw. I just might point it out, I've got a website, if anyone's in the audience who's interested, they might like to write this down, but if you search for John Hood online, you'll find it. Now, I've got all my albums. I did 10 solo albums in the 2000s, and the 3 Elks albums, all available for downloads as MP3s. I've also got a page for all the reasonably big bands I was in with tracks of them as well. So it's quite a comprehensive site of my musical history, if anyone's interested in having a look.
Yeah, I've been enjoying those MP3s myself, actually. It's fantastic.
Which ones?
Quite a bit of the Elks material because the stuff I've got is vinyl and not good for airplay, so it's good to be able to access that, and very generous of you to do so.
Well, I think the thing is, the first Elks album I put out sold about 100. I didn't get it pressed, I just got it burned. But I didn't want to sell any more than that because I didn't want to get involved with the band and royalties and all that sort of stuff. Have you got the 3 Elks albums?
Refer to Drawer, but it's not in good condition.
No, I mean the 3 Elks albums are on the MP3 files.
Yeah, got them downloaded, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because there aren't any more. I've used up all my material. But yeah, I think they're pretty good, and I think it gives an indication of what the band was like. Because I think the blues bands in Victoria and New South Wales, who were quite big and were quite good, like Carson, all those musicians stopped playing blues by about 1973 and had gone on to either country or more blues rock, which is not so bluesy but more rocky, and different kinds of music. Nobody really stayed with the blues. I suppose you could say the 4-Day Riders, but I don't think they were very powerful. The Elks were a very powerful unit. I don't know whether you'd agree with that, but having heard the albums, maybe you can tell me if you think so. But I thought they were the best rhythm and blues band in Australia. A good singer, and we had on guitar a young guy called Dave Brewer, who was an awesome talent. And the two of us together blended very well together. We didn't get in each other's way. There were no ego problems in the band. So it's just a great, good time band. I lasted about 18 months in the Elks, but the guys wanted to move to the eastern states. They eventually went to Sydney, and I had a family, a partner and a child, and I said, no, I can't go, so I had to leave the band. And they never found anyone to replace me. They went as a 5-piece. which was interesting.
Reading through your thoughts on both the Elks and Sid Rumpo on your website, I garner the impression that the Elks was, for you personally, a more enjoyable experience. Would that be a fair comment?
What are the two bands?
Yeah.
Sid Rumpo?
Yeah.
No, I think they're both equally. In my book, I say that Sid Rumpo was the number one band that I was in because I think the music, the scope for able to improvise, which I'm basically an improvising guitar player with a blues technique. I don't really necessarily play blues all the time, although in the Elks, I really stuck to my guns and just played straight blues guitar, like Otis Rush and Freddie King, Albert King to an extent, but basically the first two were my big influences on guitar, Freddie King and Otis Rush. I've got the same sort of guitar that they played. It's a Gibson ES335. So I think Sid Rumpo, for me personally, was a more enjoyable band, but the Elks was fantastic. There's no doubt about it. There's not much between them. But I think Sid Rumpo gave me a bit more, if you like, artistic freedom to play improvised guitar, which has been my big thing in life. That's what... If I could just mention, I've written a book called For the Love of Music, and it's available on the website. The theme of that is, people think the theme of it is the history of blues in Perth, but the underlying theme is my desire for self-expression in music, and that comes via the improvisation. So a lot of my solo CDs, they're very obscure. I still think they're okay, but they didn't sell very well. But that's the development of my blues guitar technique into a different kind of music, featuring a lot of improvisation. And they're all available as free downloads on the site as well. If anybody wanted to email me, there's an email link to ask me about what kind of music might be suitable for them if they wanted to know what to download, because they're 10 very different albums. There might be 2 or 3 or 2 lots of 2 albums which are in a sort of similar style.
Yeah.
I've done 3 blues albums. They're pretty much straight blues. So if anybody wanted to email me, like I said, there's a link on the site, and I can advise them, well, if you're into blues, you might like to try these. If you're a bit more adventurous, you might like to try these, and if you're really way out, try these.
Just overall, with writing the book, how did you find that experience? Did it stir up some old memories?
I suppose so, yeah. It took me about a year to write. It was a lot of fun writing the book. I really enjoyed it. The road manager for Sid Rumpo had a diary of every gig we'd ever done, where it was and how much we got paid.
Wow.
And that was an invaluable resource into doing the Sid Rumpo chapter. That's why there are 2 chapters on Sid Rumpo, but only 1 on the Elks. I had so much information. And the thing about the book is I talk a lot about the music. I talk a lot about individual songs. It's not a book about sex and drugs and rock and roll. It's a book about the music, and as I said, about my quest for personal expression through music, which a lot of people didn't get, but that's okay. It got a huge review in the newspaper here, the West Australian. It nearly took up 2 pages. And when that review hit the streets, the book really took off. 78 Records sold 100.
Wow.
Which was amazing. So we're into the second printing, and it's gone a bit slower now, of course, but I don't mind. I just want to have some there so that it's always available if anybody wants it. A lot of people have emailed me, and the most popular phrase I've heard is that it's a good read, which feels good.
Well, that's all you can ask of a good book, really, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of people have enjoyed it, they've told me, but that's the phrase that I keep hearing, a good read, which cracks me up because it's in every second email. And a lot of people have written to me saying, I can remember when you played at that pub and I used to go down there and get pissed, and it was just a great time in Perth music. I think it was the start of the Perth music rock scene. We were the first band to work almost every night. And from there it built up into lots of bands working 3 or 4 nights a week, and there were just so many gigs. Just incredible. I mean, we could have made a lot of cash in Perth, but we decided to try our luck in the Eastern States because that was sort of the centre of the music scene, and we wanted to record, and so that was the reason we left. That's about it. Anything else?
You mentioned Sid Rumpo played at Sunbury. Do you have any vivid memories of the festival?
Not particularly. I know I didn't like it. To me, it was a lot of drunk people. But I was pretty happy with our set. And during one song, the power cut out, which I can remember distinctly.
Yeah.
But one of our songs got on the record, and I still think that's a pretty good version. Actually, my book comes with a CD as well of about 18 tracks, and it's a kind of musical history of John Hood. It's an early harmonica tune from 1969, which isn't very good, just sort of the later stuff and some of the stuff I've been doing on my own. So you get the Elks and Sid Rumpo, a lot of other bands I haven't mentioned, but I did play in quite a few bands in Perth over the years. Not much rock, mostly blues or blues rock. I kept playing in bands till 2002 when we folded a band that I was in. And that was a really great band. It was called Paul Daly and the Fundamentals. I was the only guitarist, and for the first time in my life, I felt the freedom to really express in lots of different ways. Like, I could play whatever I liked. I could play guitar, harmonica, sort of harmony lines. It was just a great band. It's just that the rock scene is dead here, so we folded. And that's the last time I've played in a band. I'm now practicing with Ken Wallace from Sid Rumpo, the piano player, and he played at the book launch with me, and we're putting an album out. We're getting it recorded in September, so it'll probably come out this year. But that's kind of blues and jazz tinged original instrumentals, of which I've written pretty much all of them, because I've written a lot of music. Now, in 1991, I went to actually work in Victoria, and I wrote so much music. I think I put down about 500 ideas in 6 years. And when I came back to Perth, that was the source of the 10 recordings. All this music that I've written in Melbourne. The dam just broke. I just thought of all these ideas. Because I'd always known that I could arrange music, but it wasn't sort of appropriate. And I wrote most of the Elks originals, not that there were many, and I contributed to the Sid Rumpo. We had 3 writers in Sid Rumpo, so we had quite a variety. But I always felt I could arrange songs, but never had the opportunity to write. But in Paul Daly, I wrote quite a few songs that went over well. And I think now I'm a reasonable writer. I like to think of myself as a reasonable composer of music. It's not always blues, but it's always played with a blues guitar technique, because that's all I know. I can't play jazz, but I love jazz, and it's inspired me, not so much influenced me, but inspired me to play in a certain way. So anyway, that's an interesting point, that there's a CD with the book, which is quite comprehensive. By the way, the book sells for $17 post-free with the CD, which I thought was reasonable.
That's excellent value.
It's called For the Love of Music. So
I was interested on your website also a live gig that you describe as the classic Elks gig. On nights like that, can you feel in advance, even before you go on stage, that a band is really switched on and something special?
No, it just happened.
Yeah.
I think that one might have been about a gig in Canberra, was it?
With H.G. Nelson was doing the intro.
Oh, well, I know. That's the Elks gig that's known as Live 1977. That's one of the CDs that I put out. That's the one that sold 100.
Yep.
No, we weren't particularly switched on. It was just that it was in, I think it was at RMIT. Was that the TF Much Ballroom gig venue? Do you remember that? You're old enough to remember the TF Much Ballroom?
Not quite.
Do you know what TF stands for?
Go ahead and tell me. Too
Fucking Much Ballroom. Yeah, it was a great room. It had this incredible echo, and one of my guitar solos, the reverb is just incredible. It's just fantastic. It just makes the guitar really project. And yeah, I think that was a pretty fine gig. And if anybody wanted to download any of the Elks CDs, that would be the one, Live 1977. It's just a great gig.
Yeah.
Really good. Yeah. It's funny, is it Roy Nelson or Roy Slave? And I get them mixed up.
Yeah, me too.
It was Roy anyway. And his voice doesn't sound like it does now. He was obviously a uni student at the time. But he introduced, and the introduction actually is a classic. Just what he says, he's just, it's really beautiful. Really beautiful. It only lasts for half a minute, but it's just really great. And it's great that he's on it. And one of the singer has actually met up with him and reminded him and talked about it. And that would have been the buzz.
With the Elks, you got to work with the great Dutch Tilders as well. Any standout memories of Dutch?
Yeah, lots of memories. We toured with Dutch on the East Coast. We played in Victoria with him. We went to Canberra with him. And he used to come to Perth. He came to Perth twice. And I probably had one of my finest sets one night. Ivan Zar, the harmonica player, and Reggie's brother actually didn't like Dutch. But the rest of us thought he was okay. And Ivan Zar said, I don't want to play harmonica. And so I said, well, can I play? And I just had the most wonderful time playing harmonica, because I never played it much after I started playing guitar. And having a harmonica player in the band, I wasn't required. But I played a set on harmonica that was one of the most memorable musical nights I've ever had. I just felt so good about playing. I was using Ivan's gear and had a great amp and a great mic, and it was just fabulous. I really love it. It's documented in the book. Great gig.
Now, another great Australian bluesman, Matt Taylor, produced Refer to Joy, didn't he?
Yeah, he did produce the album.
How would you describe Matt as a producer?
Well, I don't know much about production. I think the consensus was that the album's sound was a bit flat. That was the consensus of the band. I don't really know, because I'm not into the technical side of it. I don't sort of worry too much about the sound. Like, I don't change my guitar sound all night when I play in bands. I just leave it in the same position. I'm not into going to the back pickup, which is sharper. I stay in the front pickup, which is warmer, and have the tone on full. And that's the way I've always played all those years. I never gotten really into different guitar sounds. I've just played with the one sound. So I'm not into the technical side of things. I find recording, all my records that I made, I did at home. And it's a real struggle for me to record, but I did get through it. So the consensus was that the album sounded a little bit flat. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
We worked a few gigs with Matt. He used to come and jam with us. We'd play Help Me or something like that. And I'm actually very good friends with Matt. There's a book about him as well out. It was written by some Perth guys. And I think he might be writing his own book as well.
Oh, is he? Terrific.
Yeah, I think he might be. I don't see him very often anymore, because I'm not in the music scene, and he doesn't do much either. But he's lived in Perth for many years now.
That's right.
I'd say about 30.
Yep.
And he gets Perth musicians, and they tour the East Coast. He's had many, many Perth musicians that I know playing guitar, bass and drums that have toured with him, and he's made records with it. A lot of my friends have made albums with him and toured with him.
Now, before I let you go, apart from the album that you're going to be working on shortly, what else is keeping you busy these days?
Well, I play finger-picking acoustic guitar, and I like doing that for relaxation. I taught myself to finger-pick in the 1980s after I'd left bands, because I got a real job and left bands, and I started to teach myself finger-picking guitar. I half learnt one song out of a book on how to finger-pick, but when I learned how to do the alternating bass on the thumb, then I started writing my own music, and I've got a pretty big repertoire of finger-picking tunes, so I sort of and I put albums out of fingerpicking as well. I tend to do a bit of that. I was a computer programmer, so I still like to muck around with programming. Geez, what do? I listen to music a lot. Classical music I really like, and jazz, and I still listen to blues occasionally, because I'm still a bluesman at heart. The guitar playing I'm going to play on this instrumental record has got the same blues technique that I had when I was in the Elks. I haven't changed my technique. I've just developed the style to sound a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
It's more jazz-oriented, but it's not real jazz. I haven't got the ability to play real jazz, but it's got sometimes a jazz feeling, and that's where I'm at now. So I don't know if we'll make another record. We might, or we might not. But I'm 64 now, so I'm sort of not young anymore. I was talking the other day to John Pugh. Have you ever heard of him?
Name rings a bell.
Yeah, he's a Victorian musician. He played in quite a few bands in the 70s. He played in the 18th Century Quartet, which are probably... How old are you?
52.
52 or 62?
50.
Okay, you're much too young for all the bands that he played in.
Yeah.
He's a good friend of mine, lives in Victoria. And I still talk to Rob Searles from Sid Rumpo.
Oh, yeah.
And Ken Wallace, obviously, because I practiced with him last night. And I've recently caught up with Noel Herridge, the drummer, who I haven't spoken to for 35 years at least. And that was fun. He lives in Bali now, but he was in Victoria because he's got a mum who's quite ill, but she's very old. But he lives in Bali now. And the only one I don't speak to is Owen Hughes, and he's a professor at a university in Adelaide.
Oh.
He was actually... Four of the band have got university degrees. It was a bit of intellectual band in a way. Yeah. I think actually for Noel it was a bit sort of hard. I think he probably appreciated it when Mick Elliott came on board, and I think they were both hard drinkers, and Mick was the sort of quintessential rock player, and I think it actually gave the band a boost when he left. I think when we first started playing, I was the right guitarist for the band, but when I left, I wasn't the right guitarist for the band. They wanted to become a bit more rockier, a bit more hard rock, or not hard rock, but a bit more sort of, a bit more, all I can say is rockier. Yeah. And I wanted to keep the improvisation side of it going, and that was lagging. We weren't writing songs like that anymore. But Mick Elliott was a tough, really tough guitar player, really strong. Great sound, great attack on the guitar. And I think sounds good on the album. Very out of the blues, the English blues style. Clapton, Beck and Page and that sort of thing. Yeah. Very strong guitar player. And it was great that they got him when I left because it really gave them a lift. And he's on the record and he sounds pretty good.
Yeah, he's a good fit.
Yeah, so I don't do much really. I've got a son who lives in Perth. I've got a son who lives in the Eastern States, a photographer, but I've got a son who lives in Perth. I see a bit of him. We practice twice a week with Ken. Other than that, I don't have much to do with playing music, just listening to music and trying to push the book.
Which is called For the Love of Music, and it's available...
For the Love of Music.
Yep, For the Love of Music, and on your website, jhredguitar.com.
Yeah, that's probably... You need to work out the JH Red Guitar is one word.
Yeah, all one word.
JH for John Hood and Red Guitar for Red Guitar. But if you search John Hood online, that'll be the first hit you'll get.
Yep.
Will be my site, which will give you all the details about bands, and I kind of write a bit of a story about each band that I got involved in. And like I say, there are tracks to download, or you can download all my albums and the Elks albums on MP3 for free. Because I just like to get the music out there. That's what it's about for me. It's not about, you know, being a rock star. I just like people to hear what I do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic, John. Look, thanks so much for your time, and thanks for your contribution to some fantastic Australian music over the years. And we look forward to hearing more from you. And that.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's marvellous.
All the best.
Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers, bye.